Absolute truth isn't always the same as the reasons we claim for it. Sometimes we see the physical evidence and then make a leap in logic based on our own motives, biases, or fears. We say, it must be so, but what we're really doing is layering personal assumptions on top of raw data. That's where things get complicated, the difference between what's factually true and why we say it's true. Those aren't always the same argument. We tend to treat empirical evidence like a stamp of approval for any policy or law. A government or institution will point to a study or a statistic, then make an enormous jump from the data to the final decree. Instead of acknowledging, yes, this law was formed by combining evidence plus our own interpretation, they'll just say, look at the evidence. Case closed. We see this happen in everything from health regulations to economic policies. Anyone who questions that jump is labeled uninformed or even irresponsible. But the truth is, there's a missing link, the layer of imagination and assumption in between. We move out of the realm of absolute truth the moment we guess, infer, or hypothesize what might happen if we don't follow some new rule. That guesswork is rarely presented openly. It's more convenient to cloak it in the language of certainty. We also see this dynamic in spiritual and personal realms. We each live in a different experiential reality, so we can't say there's absolute truth in every subjective domain. We have personal biases that shape how we see the world. One community's solution can become another community's nightmare. When laws or mandates solve one group's grievances, they can easily create new problems for a dozen other groups. The louder group might feel triumphant, but the less vocal community suddenly feels marginalized. It's an endless loop. One side wins, another loses, frustration builds, and the cycle continues. This same pattern appears in our personal lives. We cling to the idea that more money, a better job, or a single stroke of luck will solve every problem. Yet many people finally reach that financial milestone or land their dream gig, only to find themselves even more miserable. The underlying bad habits and mindset remain. Money just amplifies the issues. The short burst of excitement from not worrying about next month's rent fades when old patterns resurface. The internal void remains unaddressed. Governance often works like that too. We think, if this one law passes, or if we get that major reform, everything will finally be okay. Then a short-lived sense of relief sets in, followed by all the unintended consequences nobody talked about. We see the immediate upsides and ignore the long-term costs, or we choose to see only what benefits us personally. Not enough people ask, what's the trade-off? Who's paying the price? What might this look like in 10 years? Because it's much simpler to celebrate a win than to think about who might be losing somewhere else. None of this means we shouldn't pursue improvements or advocate for change. It just means we have to be brutally honest about the complexities. Every policy or personal decision comes with second and third order effects, whether that's in the form of inflation, social tension, or erosion of personal accountability. When we get caught up in the hype of win now, worry later, we overlook the fundamental principle that nothing comes for free. Inflation is a prime example. A government might hand out benefits or inject money into the economy, framing it as a net positive for the people. And maybe, for a moment, it is. But if you zoom out, those extra dollars often lead to higher prices. If no one planned for inflation or tried to mitigate its effects, it can erode the very advantage that was supposed to help. Everyone ends up asking, why can't I stay ahead? The reason is that the solution was incomplete from the start. It overlooked the hidden costs. The same logic applies to how we're sold on big promises. Politicians or corporate leaders promise the world, showing you select figures or isolated stats. They'll say, because of these numbers, we must act now. Meanwhile, they quietly rely on your confusion, your apathy, or your trust to wave through legislation that benefits them more than it benefits you. People rarely demand a deeper breakdown of assumptions. Are these stats the entire picture? How exactly do you connect these stats to that law or policy? Do we have other options? Those questions are often bypassed in the public discourse because raising them makes you look like the enemy of progress. But it's the only way to avoid being manipulated. Believing there is a single right answer to every societal or personal problem is a convenient delusion. We're dealing with complex systems where each new solution creates new variables, for better or worse. One community might finally feel heard, but in addressing their issues, the system ignores or exacerbates someone else's problems. Then the cycle continues. That's why universal one-size-fits-all solutions rarely work in practice. It's not that solutions shouldn't be tried. It's that we have to be mindful. We have to know what we're truly signing up for. The same principle applies to you on a personal level. Thinking that a sudden infusion of wealth, status, or external validation will heal all wounds is a trap. If there's no plan to address the underlying habits and beliefs, we end up repeating the same mistakes at a higher level. Money might mask problems for a while, but eventually, the old dysfunction resurfaces. Habits that drive you away from who you want to be don't disappear just because your circumstances improve. If anything, they become more entrenched when you have the resources to indulge them without immediate external pressure. That's why some extremely wealthy people end up just as miserable as they were before, sometimes even more so because they thought a financial windfall would fix everything. It doesn't address the root cause. It's the same in governance. We think once the government gives me this or fixes that, I'll be happy. But the government's primary role isn't to fix our internal struggles. It's typically to handle collective concerns like infrastructure, defense, and regulations. The moment we expect it to solve personal or existential problems, we set ourselves up for disappointment. We hand over power without acknowledging the chain reaction it triggers. We get the policy we asked for, fail to see how it morphs over time, and then wonder why things feel out of control. The bottom line is that all real solutions come with a price tag, personal or societal. If we keep ignoring the price, we'll keep getting blindsided. If we remain aware of the hidden trade-offs, we can at least make informed decisions. That might mean we decide not to chase certain dreams if the cost is too high, or we might decide to push for a policy, but adjust our expectations about its side effects. It may also mean acknowledging that no single policy can address everyone's needs simultaneously. You fix one thing, you break another. That's just the nature of living in a connected world with diverse perspectives and conflicting interests. Question motives, whether they're coming from a politician, a business, or even your own hopes for a better life. Scrutinize the claims people make about what's good for everyone. Examine the assumptions behind the laws you obey. And before you pin your happiness on material success, consider the deeper issues you might be avoiding. There will never be one right answer for how the world should function. Our differences and contradictions ensure that. We can, however, reduce naive acceptance and tackle problems more intelligently if we're willing to examine the hidden connections and the real price of every choice. That mindset might not fix everything, but it keeps us from handing over our autonomy, whether that's to governments, social expectations, or our own illusions about what will finally make us happy.